Why is it in the 21st century, where we supposedly have access to all this data all the time and we all know everything instantly, why are we always surprised by things, right? Why is it that things that happen in the world always seem to catch us unprepared? And so you know what my answer for that is going to be? My answer for that is going to be that you should all be history majors, because if you're history major, or just take, I don't care whether you're a major or not, just take a bunch of history classes, because you will be less likely to be surprised by the things that happen to you over the course of your life. Like if nothing else, it'll help you not be surprised by stuff that happens. Okay, our job today is to set up Europe. If you're looking at it from the point of view of today, you could be thinking, well, is Ukraine Europe? Is Europe Ukraine? But we're not there yet. We're thinking about the world before Europe, because Ukraine, Kiev and Rus, which we're going to get to in the next lecture, Kiev and Rus is coming into being at a time when the notion of Europe doesn't really exist yet and wouldn't really make any sense. So I'm going to start by talking about a couple of ways that people look at the sequence of events that led to Europe. Then I'm going to move on to the things which really were there before Europe. I'm going to talk about language for a bit. I'm going to talk about pre-Christian religion for a bit. And then I'm going to move towards the story of how this state came into being. So if you are in, broadly speaking, the trajectory of Western Europe, the United States, or North America, the way that the trajectory of European history is taught begins with ancient Greece. And I'm not going to change that here. We're also going to be talking about ancient Greece. I'm going to be messing with it a little bit. I did the whole thing with the olive tree and the trident already, right? Did I do that in an earlier lecture? No, I didn't do that? Okay. So I did or I didn't? You're the only one who remembers it. Okay. Maybe the entire class has switched out since then, and you're the only, like, this was a really aggressive shopping period. They're all new. Okay, so just to remind you that of Athens itself, the founding story of Athens itself involves an olive tree and a trident. It involves a contest between Athena, the goddess Athena, and Poseidon. Who gets to be the namesake? You know the answer, because the city is not called, Poseidon, it's called Athens. So Athena wins because she gives the Athenians an olive tree, and the Athenians say, this is very nice, shade, olive oil, right? Poseidon strikes his trident on the ground, and seawater springs forth, and the Athenians say, that doesn't taste very good, we're not really into that. That's the way the story goes, right? That's the way the story goes. And it brings you an image of Athens, which is peaceful and contemplative and maybe tending towards consumer society. It's a certain image of democracy, right? Whereas Poseidon is offering, strife and sea commerce and war and navies and things like that. Now, underneath that story is a question, because all societies, in the way that they tell their story of founding, are hiding something, right? In this little story, what's being hidden is the answer to the question, how can you possibly live just on olive oil, right? You can't. I mean, no, yes, I mean, at least you need a little bread, at least, with the olive oil. And so where was the bread coming from? I'm now going to see if anybody was at this. Where was the bread coming from? Where were the calories actually coming from? The grain. Yes.
The southern Ukraine, right?
Right, southern, what's now southern Ukraine, the northern coast. So the ancient world, the ancient Greek world, includes the Black Sea, up to and including the North Black Sea coast, which is now southern Ukraine. That's where the calories came from. And so you can plant your little city-state full of olive trees because you're engaged in an international trade, and you're getting your calories from somewhere else. So this isn't just mark that. That's important, because the connection of our part of the world with other parts of the world by way of food and calories is enduring. So for the ancient Greeks, what we're calling Ukraine was a place. And if you did your reading of the Serhi Plokhy, you'll know that for Herodotus, who is a major source, the ancient historian Herodotus, along with Thucydides, the two people who found history as such, the Herodotus maps what we call Ukraine in a certain way, correctly, which is sea, coast, steppe, and forest, moving from south to north, right? Sea, coast, steppe, and forest. And the further north you go, the more exotic it is, right? So from the point of view of that civilization, northward means more exotic. And so it's in the north that a lot of the Greek mythology is located. A lot of the, like the Elysian Fields are there, and the mountains of Hyperborea are there, Griffins are there, all kinds of stuff is there. The Scythians, they locate, I didn't write the Scythians. The Scythians are also there. The Scythians are in fact real. And they did inhabit what's now Ukraine at the time, and they did fantastic work in gold. So that part of the part about Ukraine being rich in gold is not entirely false. The treasures of the Scythians still exist. They're still in museums. They're being looted in this war. So there are a lot of ways in which what happens in the war actually reminds us of things that were a couple of thousand years ago, like the Scythians, for example. There's a museum in Ukraine which was looted, and the Scythian gold work has now been taken off to Russia. Okay, so the Greeks are already looking at the territory that we think of as Ukraine, and they already have a certain geographical view of it, which is south to north. And I want you to think about this because we are, we're in the West, and so when we look at Ukraine, we're thinking, okay, West Ukraine, East Ukraine. But from the point of view of our story, south to north and north to south is actually much more important, at least for the first few weeks of this class. Okay, so if you're looking, taking ancient Greece as a starting point, if you're now looking at this whole thing from today, but from a Western point of view, there's a certain way that ancient Greece connects to you. And this will be familiar to you probably. It goes like this. There was Greece, and then there was Rome, and then Rome fell, right? Very dramatic, it fell. Imagine all the buildings falling, right? It's a very dramatic image. Rome fell. It was overrun by barbarians. It ceased to exist, right? Very dramatic. And then nothing happened for a while. And then there was a Renaissance, or there were Dark Ages, and then there was a Renaissance. And in that Renaissance, miraculously, the clever Europeans discovered all those things that were lost. They discovered the Greek stuff and the Roman stuff, and so I told you before, always be skeptical of this rebirth metaphor, because if you think about rebirth for 1 second, it's really creepy, right? I mean, just birth itself, honestly, like, I don't know how many of you have seen one, but it's a thing. And I like to think about this, doing it twice with this, I mean, it's just, so be suspicious of rebirth metaphors, including the Renaissance. So anyway, this is a Western perspective, right? Greece, Rome falls. Then there's a Renaissance where everything is rediscovered. And then after the Renaissance comes nations. And the French, the Italians, the British, and so on, all in some way look back to ancient Greece through this pattern. If you're in our part of the world, this looks different. You can still start with ancient Greece, as I say. There's Rome, there's ancient Greece, there's Rome. So far, so good. Does Rome fall? No, never falls. Yeah, okay. There's like one stolid supporter of Byzantium over here. I'm glad. That's right. Rome does not fall, right? Rome doesn't fall. The buildings don't all fall. The Colosseum doesn't fall. It's still there. You can visit it today. Trust me. It doesn't all fall down. The barbarians don't all come rushing in one day and have a barbarian party. That never happens. Part of the Roman Empire slowly falls under the influence of others. The capital of Rome moves to the city which is today known as Istanbul, but which for a long time was known as Constantinople. And the Roman Empire continues as Byzantium. It continues for another 1,000 years, which, let's face it, even if we're cynical, is a pretty long time. And that thing which is called the Renaissance, where the clever Europeans like rediscover all the things, that the Renaissance is possible, in large measure, because Rome never fell in the first place, because there was, so I'm not going to say that Byzantium preserved everything of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, it didn't, but it preserved a lot of things, like, for example, the Iliad. So if you've had like any kind, like if you've done, DS here, had any kind of that sort of education, the Iliad only exists, that's the story of the Trojan War with Achilles and all these figures. The Iliad only exists because people for 1,000 years in Byzantium hand copied the thing over and 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 over again, right? Until late in the day, copies were transferred to Italy right before Byzantium was overcome, let's say, and then they were printed in Italy and translated, and then it becomes a classic text. And so therefore, because of Byzantium, we have Achilles, we have the Iliad, we have Homer, right? And we can say, oh, we rediscovered it, isn't that wonderful? And we can do that kind of time travel magic where we leap back to ancient Greece, but it's less time travel magic if you remember that Byzantium was actually around for another 1,000 years. And for our story, for our East European story, you just can't do without Byzantium in the middle. If you're telling the story from a Western point of view, it's kind of awkward that Byzantium is still there, right? It's kind of awkward. It's like you're trying to like date a new person, but you're still going out with the other person, but it's like, I'm not really, not really, like, she's not, and that's what Byzantium is like in the Western story. Like, okay, there's this huge thing over there and it calls itself Rome and they're speaking Greek, but it's not really Europe. It's not really there. Let's just look the other way, right? That's what Byzantium is if you're doing the West European thing. But if you're not, if you're trying to figure out Ukraine, or for that matter, Russia or Belarus, but the fact that Byzantium is there the whole time is important. It's not marginal. It's not some kind of unwanted appendage. It's not this confusing thing. It's part of this unbroken tradition, right? So I was just in central Kiev, and I was looking at the cathedral, which is spectacularly beautiful, St. Sophia, and it was built, that was built in 1037, right? It was built while Byzantium was still around. It was built 3 centuries before Notre Dame, right? 3 centuries before Notre Dame. The daughter of the guy who had it built, by the way, was Queen of France, and she went to France and she said, this place is backward and dirty and I really want to go home, right? So that gives you and that's not just the kind of thing that makes Ukrainians proud, but it also just gives you a sense that for quite a while, this Byzantine story was a hardier and more interesting story than the West European story. Okay, so there's a different story starting with ancient Greece, which is in a way more robust and continuous. I'm not saying it had to be that way. I'm not saying that Ukraine had to be part of the Byzantine tradition. Other things could have happened, but that is in fact how it turned out. Okay,